What is the Jewish understanding of heaven?
You mentioned the Golem specifically, so in Jewish mysticism is like it's a being that they make out of clay. Most of the Muslim countries, they see Muslim control as being just part of this larger Muslim empire.
So are you saying that there's a good chance Post Malone is being haunted by a Dybbuk? Hello and welcome back to No Man's Friend. I'm your host, Garrett and today I'm here with Jacob Falach. Jacob, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, my name's Jacob Falach, as you just said. I am an online activist for conservative values. I fight against anti-Semitism. I am also a proud Zionist, as well as I am a writer and producer within the conservative movement.
All right, well, we're going to get into a lot of those topics today, but first, we need to talk about breaking news. They tried to kill Donald Trump. What are your thoughts on that?
It's insanity, but it's, a lot of people, when they talk about it right now, they're basically saying, oh, no one would have expected this. This is crazy, like a presidential assassination. That's like the most crazy thing you could imagine. It's shocking, and it's very sad to speak like on the state of the country right now. But the thing you need to remember, this is anything but like surprising. And why do I say that? When I first got into politics in 2016, right, I came out as a supporter of Donald Trump. I was just a teenager. I was in high school. I didn't know what I was doing. From that very moment, when he announced, I think it was 2015 actually, when he announced he was running for president, since then, consistently until today, that's 8 years, they've called him Hitler. They've called him a Nazi. They've called all of his supporters Nazis. So it's like, you got to think. So I was actually talking to somebody about this earlier. One of the most like popular ethics questions that people will bring up in debates about ethics, they even made like a scene in Deadpool about it that didn't get released into theaters, is if you could go back in time, would you kill baby Hitler? Right? Because on one end, you have a baby that hasn't done anything. Would you kill him? On the other end, you have a guy that's going to carry out a genocide in the future. So would you kill him? But now imagine you got asked the same question, but he's not a baby. He's like 1 year away, less than a year away from taking power and turning Germany into a dictatorship. That is what the minds of like thousands of people in our country are going through, because for 8 years they've listened to the news paint Donald Trump as being like some Hitlerian figure that's about to turn our country into a dictatorship, a threat to our democracy. So it's not shocking that this happened, and it is one. You got to put the blame on the shooter itself, obviously, at the end of the day. But there is some blame to be shared by like the media that's painted this guy in a way that he is not.
Something I kept hearing when I would speak to people who are more liberal leaning is that Trump is an existential threat. And I actually yesterday, while it was happening, I was talking to somebody who was more liberal, and he was making that case that he's an existential threat and we have to get him out of office. He also thought Biden was cognizant, and I thought that was funny. But then when we got the news, we both looked at our phones, and he goes, oh my God, this is terrible. I can't believe someone would shoot someone running for president. And I would go, you just said he's an existential threat. That means if he is not stopped, the world ends, life ends. That is what that means. So it's a little bizarre to me that there's that cognitive dissonance with arguments like that.
You have to ask him, what is he a threat to? Because almost certainly he'd repeat the line that the mainstream media has been saying for the past, I don't know how many years, which is a threat to democracy. But the funny thing about that is that a threat to democracy, what is democracy? Well, first of all, we're in a constitutional republic, but there's an aspect of democracy within it. What is a democracy? A democracy is who the people vote for represent them. If you got half the country wanting to vote for this guy, how is he a threat to democracy? If he wins an election, that is not a threat to democracy. That is the exercise of a democracy. But it's really, at the end of the day, it's not a threat to the democracy. It's a threat to the liberal establishment and everything that they stand for, because this guy opposes their values, just as every presidential election where the incumbent is getting challenged by someone from the opposite party, but they don't want to accept that. They don't want to lose.
Well, even worse, I've seen some of the news coverage has already started saying that we got to this point because of MAGA nationalism.
I mean, what does that even mean? It's like, it's okay, sorry that the conservatism that Americans are waking up to is not like the boomer 2013 conservatism where it's like, okay, you know what, now we're okay with gay marriage. No, people are starting to wake up to what true conservatism is. It's populism at the end of the day. And, I mean, people don't like that. People are used to like Mitch McConnell and establishment Republicans who have their politics that are, aligned with the establishment Republicans. But Donald Trump, he's brought in this new, nationalistic view in American politics, and the young American conservatives love it. I mean, it's like you'd think that I mean, obviously there are many young liberal people, young progressive leftist people, but there are a lot of very passionate conservatives who you're not going to get passionate about like tax reform or something like that. These are young people who are passionate about social issues in the United States that Donald Trump has really been the spear on. Donald Trump started the movement. He hasn't fully, created the parameters of the movement. Really, the people have taken the movement that Trump started and formulated around what we're seeing today. But Donald Trump was the start of it. And again, the establishment doesn't like that. So like what your friend said, he's a threat.
Yeah, and then it's like the whole situation is just ridiculous. I mean, given that we've now seen all the satellite footage of what the place looked like and how they set it up, how the hell do they miss that? How do they let the guy get up on the roof? How's there a ladder right behind a tree that is so conveniently hidden? And I also thought it was funny that the shooters for Trump, his defense guys, were aiming right at him before it happened. And I don't know if I want to jump to conspiracy that, oh, it was done, but it seems like a lot of people are already coming out and saying this is either the biggest blunder in the Secret Service's history and that Kimberly Cheadle needs to resign. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, what are your thoughts on all of that? How far would you go?
Yeah, well, like you, I'm not the most keen person to jump into conspiracies, but what I will say is, I mean, I've seen really three main theories going about. And the first theory is that it's as the news is portraying it. Donald Trump someone attempted to assassinate Donald Trump. That's it. And it was just a mistake on the Secret Service's part for not saying that. That's like the official. The second one is that Donald Trump himself hired this guy to shoot him from a football field away, and the bullet on purpose grazed his ear, which that, if you go back and look at the video, I mean, Donald, you see, I forget which book it was that I had read, but it talked about what the body goes through when it gets shot. And it's like, I think like 80% of times, don't quote me on that, I think it's like 80% of times, at first the person doesn't even feel that they get shot because bullets are so fast and they rip through the flesh so fast that it takes like a second to realize what happened and start to feel the pain. You see Donald, he gets hit by the bullet, and it's not until like a half a second later he goes and feels his ear, and then he drops. If this was like a staged shooting from Donald would have, I mean, I'll get to the practical part about it in a second, but like just the part of him on the stage, he would have had like more of an exaggerated reaction. He wouldn't have waited he would have like ducked immediately and gone down, but he didn't. There was a second where he was like, what? And then he dropped down. But then also the other crazy aspect of that is like, one, they hired someone that knew they were going to die. I mean, I guess you could have found someone crazy enough to do that. Be like, I'm going to die for my country. This will help Donald Trump get elected. But again, that's very, very far-fetched. And the second thing is, if you found someone that was willing to do that, what the hell are the chances that they're going to be a good enough of a sniper to shoot from across a football field and only hit his ear? If Donald would have like turned his head like this much to the left, he would have gotten shot in the brain, So it's like that alone, I don't buy that at all. The other one is that, Secret Service might have a mole, might have somebody inside that, is working with whoever that wants Donald Trump to get killed. And it was not a unintentional mistake, but it was an intentional mistake. I think out of all the conspiracy theories, that is the most likely. But I don't know if I'm willing to commit to it right away. I need to see more. I know like the Biden administration has rejected, I saw this yesterday. The Biden administration has like rejected pleas from the Secret Service to buffer their security for Donald Trump and stuff like that. So, it raises an eyebrow, but again, I don't think there's enough proof or information out there to really solidify it as fact, in my mind, at least.
Well, I think everybody's waiting for the guy with the red hair and the red hat who the BBC reporter spoke to. I think everyone's waiting for him to be identified and maybe make another statement about what he saw.
Yeah, if they find him alive,
Oh, Jesus.
You never know, man. I'm telling you. What if Hillary's involved? She's I saw a post yesterday that said Donald Trump ended Hillary's political career in 2016, and he ended her kill streak in 2024. It's like it's a
hard-hitting tweet.
People have their theories, but again, you got to be very careful jumping on them, because if you like jump onto a conspiracy theory that gets proven wrong, your career is kind of, so you got to be very careful. Got to take them all with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and it's crazy that this happened when we scheduled our podcast because we weren't supposed to talk about this. Obviously, it wasn't supposed to happen. I want to
Nope.
talk about non-controversial topics. We were supposed to talk about Judaism and Zionism.
Yeah.
So you want to get into that?
Whatever you want, man. You ask me anything. I'm an open book.
Well, I wanted to start with kind of the three different concepts of Judaism, which
Hmm.
are religion, race, and country.
Okay.
So I want to understand why people think or get them confused, and maybe we could walk
Mhm.
through them one by one to kind of talk about them. Race would probably be the easiest one to start with. It probably is the least to discuss.
Yeah. So personally, I don't really sympathize with the proposed description of the Jewish people because there's a wonderful saying in the Chabad Lubavitcher movement, which is a Jew is a Jew. It's like the sect of Orthodox Judaism that I'm from, and it doesn't matter if you're a member of the state of Israel. It doesn't matter if you're racially Jewish. It doesn't matter if you're a convert to the faith. A Jew is a Jew. But to describe what a Jew is, the term for it is an ethnic religious group. And an ethnic religious group, you can really only Jews are a very unique. Like I don't think there are any other ethnic religious groups out there. The way that you would describe and to understand what a Jew is, you have to look at our history, right? So you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Bible. Then you have Jacob's sons, and eventually they end up in the land of Egypt. And then, as a nation, through Moses, they get exiled. And that nation that wandered through the desert and they got the Torah and the Ten Commandments, that nation, before they got the Torah and the Ten Commandments, like, yeah, they believed in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their ancestor. But really, when they got the Torah and the Ten Commandments and that faith was established, not only were they the ethnic group, now they had an established faith. So it's an ethnic religious group. It is an ethnic group that now has adopted a religion, like consciously. So, so they move into the land of Israel, and there were two exiles. One was the Babylonian exile, and the second was the Roman exile. And when the Romans kicked all the Jews out of Israel in 70 CE and destroyed our temple, those Jews went all over the world, to Africa, to Egypt, to
And this is where they split
Europe,
into the groups we have today, like Ashkenazi, and I'm probably gonna.
Ashkenazi, Sephardic. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. So those words basically just mean what part of the world that they settled in after the exile. And over time, their bodies adapt to it. That's why you see the Sephardic Jews with the brown hair, the Ashkenazi Jews sometimes looking like you, colored eyes. Um, but the Jewish people, we're bound together by the ethnicity, the nation that left Egypt. We all descend from them, but we're also bound together by the religion that was given to us on Mount Sinai. But I will say that part of that religion adheres to the prophets. The prophets of the Hebrew Bible, and one of the prophets, Ezra, established something called matrilineal rule, which basically means that you are Jewish by race if your mother is Jewish. And so anyone throughout the world, say they drop the religious part, if their mother is Jewish and they just become like a Muslim living in Saudi Arabia, they're still a Jew. So you can separate them. Like, we're bound together by the two things, but if you only have one of them, if you have the ethnic part, if your mom's a Jew, you're a Jew, even knowing if your religion is Islam or whatever. And if you only have the religious part, say you convert to Judaism, you still have that faith. So you're still part of the group in that way. I know it's, speaking about like what makes a Jew is one of the more complicated, even I, who grew up with a Jewish identity, struggled to understand it for a while. But when you look into it, it does make sense. You just have to take a little bit of time to learn about it.
Well, what's the importance of that rule that if your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish? Isn't it? Wouldn't it be like by DNA technically?
Well, no. So some people say that it was because back in the day you wouldn't be able to tell who the father is, but you'd be able to know who the mother is.
Hmm.
But really, I just go the main source for it for me is just completely religious based. Ezra came to the nation of Israel and he saw that there were a bunch of the male Israelites that went and took wives from other nations and made children with them, and I believe it was because he thought that the wives were going to turn their children to other gods. So Ezra went to them and said, "No, any man who has children with foreign wives, banish those children and the wives, for they're not a member of the nation of Israel." Again, not an exact quote; it's a rough, of what he said. But that alone, it's really faith based. Ezra the prophet is the one that established that rule. So therefore, you have, I'll share something a little bit intimate. I am actually a patrilineal Jew. So my father is Jewish, but my mother is not. So you might ask yourself, okay, so how are you Jewish if the faith you know. So the only way to get around the patrilineal rule, according to Jewish law, is you go through a proper Orthodox religious conversion. Not easy to do. Took me about 3.5 years.
What does that entail?
So much. You know, you got to keep a kosher diet. You have to be something called Shomer Shabbat, which means you have to live close enough to a synagogue to walk there on Shabbat because you can't drive on Saturday. You can't use any electronics or fire on Saturday. It's a lot of learning the Torah, learning certain parts of halacha, which is Jewish law. It entailed quite a bit. And so that's the way that you can get around it if you're born to like a Jewish father, or you don't have to have a Jewish parent at all. You can just convert. But it's difficult. It takes a long time. And Judaism doesn't look for converts. So if you go to a rabbi...
I was going to ask about that. Isn't there like a thing where they kind of are like, maybe don't?
Yeah. So a Jewish rabbi, an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, technically speaking, I believe it's 3 times is supposed to turn you away. When I went to my rabbi here in Nashville, amazing Rabbi Yitzhak Tuktel, I went to him and I said, I want to convert, you know, and I explained to him the situation with my father and how I grew up with a Jewish upbringing, but I am, you know, Jewish law says I'm not a Jew, so I want to convert. He turned me away. Didn't matter if I read Hebrew. Didn't matter if I had a bar mitzvah in a less religious denomination that accepted me as a Jew or, you know, whatever. He tried to turn me away. And when I told him, no, I want to do it, he turned me away again and again. And then eventually he was like, okay, do this, read this book. And eventually read this book turned into study with this rabbi. And then study with this rabbi turned into change your diet to be like this. And then after change your diet to be like this, it says, okay, move across the street from the synagogue. After move across the street from the synagogue, it turned to, okay, you're a part of the community. Let's go to the Beis Din, which is a court of rabbis, and they'll make the final judgment. They made the judgment on me and they converted me. So it's not easy and they don't look for it. But the thing to understand is that the reason they don't look for it is because they don't think you need to be Jewish to be good in the eyes of God. The Jews have always been meant to be a minority. And we have a specific mission in the world, which is to be like a priestly nation, to show the nations around the world, specifically in the Messianic age, and now as well, but specifically in the future Messianic age, like how to worship God correctly and stuff like that. But you don't need to be Jewish. There's something called a Noahide, which is like someone who follows the basic moral laws that were established around the time of Noah, like basic stuff like don't kill, basic stuff like that. And most Christians, most Muslims, they believe that they behave this way. So we don't think that I would never go to a Christian, be like, yo, bro, you got to be Jewish or else you're not going to have salvation, or a Muslim, because that's not what we believe.
So can you speak to that a little bit more? Because I've heard people more in a detracting kind of way make the case that Jews think they're better than other people because of that special mission. I was wondering if you could correct that for me.
Not at all. Every single man on the face of the man and woman on the face of the planet was made out of Adam and Eve. All of us. We were all made in the image of God. There is no racial superiority to Jewish people. There is no, God does not favor the Jewish people like on an intrinsic value level more than a regular person. We specifically are just separated because we have a specific job. I'm not going to sit here as a religious Jew and tell you that God loves me more than you because I'm a member of this nation. I think you are loved by God the exact same way, but God just expects something different of me because I took an oath upon myself to join a nation that has a specific mission. That is it, and that is all.
And this is an oath anyone can take, as you explained.
You can convert, but it's not. Again, it's not easy, and you don't need to. Jews, we believe that actually, to fix my language that I said a little bit earlier, nobody converts to Judaism. In Jewish belief, if somebody does convert, like they finish a conversion, they were always Jewish. They had a Jewish soul that was meant to be Jewish in this world. And if they finish the conversion, they go through all of those challenges, then it's established that, yes, they were a Jewish soul and they were meant to come out into this world as a Jew.
What would it mean in the inverse if somebody was Jewish and then they converted to another religion? Were they never a Jewish soul? Were they?
No. Not at all. People, there have been many cases of Jews throughout, even you can look through as far back as the Bible who have turned away from the way. You had even in Egypt, it's a Jewish belief that I think most of the Jews didn't leave Egypt, or a significant fraction of the Jews didn't leave Egypt. They stayed there and chose to remain slaves while the rest of the Israelites left. Jews not choosing the right thing throughout history is like a kind of a recurring pattern. But God continuously reminds us that we have a specific task, and he guides us back on course. You have the story of Hanukkah, where the Maccabees fought the Seleucid Empire and kicked them out. But there were many Hellenized Jews. One of the things that set off the Maccabean revolt was a Hellenized Jew who tried to sacrifice a pig on a non-approved altar in the middle of Israel, and he got killed by one of the Maccabean priests. So it's like,
just to clarify, when you say Hellenized, can you clarify what that means?
Hellenized are Jews who adopted many of the Roman theological practices.
So the pantheon of gods. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And also, you can't sacrifice a pig either. That's definitely not something that was not an approved animal in the Jewish culture to sacrifice.
Well, now you're getting into the rules. How many rules, or do you guys call them commandments?
We call them commandments, or in Hebrew, mitzvot.
How many are there?
So there's 613 in total.
That includes the 10?
Yes, that includes the 10. So 613. But I can't give you the exact number, but a significant fraction of them cannot be completed today because there's no temple standing. There's a lot of like sacrificial commandments that, like, when the temple is standing. See, we as Jews believe that the temple will be rebuilt one day in Jerusalem when the Messiah comes. And no, you know what? Let me be strong and brave. We know that it will be built one day when the Messiah comes. And when the temple is rebuilt, all those commandments will resume, but they're very specific. Like, you got to mix this with this to create the purification water to be able to go up to the temple. And when you go up to the temple, you have to slaughter this animal if you commit this type of sin or this type of sin. There are many, 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 many commandments like that, but you can't do a significant fraction of them because the temple no longer stands. So we just, as Jews, while we're in the diaspora, waiting for God to bring us back, as the prophet said, we follow the commandments that we can. And those are, primarily dietary, Shabbat laws, Sabbath laws, moral laws. There's many of them that we still have to follow in the diaspora, but many we can't.
If I could ask, which of the commandments do you carry with you the most in your day-to-day? And which one do you wrestle with the most?
It's a good question. Well, let's see. Every morning, Jewish people, we wear this thing called tefillin, which is like a black box that goes here on the arm and a black box that goes here on the head. And you wrap them, and that was actually, it's derived from the Torah. It was a commandment that basically says you're supposed to keep the commandment on your head and on your arms to like constantly remind you of them. So there are many commandments, but every morning we're reminded that we need to follow them by those boxes. When we pray, quite literally inside the box is the commandment to keep them. But personally, sometimes when I fall away from them, and I'll give you a specific answer in a second, but when I fall away from them sometimes, because I'm just a human being, I'm not perfect, every morning when I wrap the tefillin and I remind myself that I need to be doing it, it kind of keeps me on track. Now, me personally, I'll be honest with you, being a religious Jew in Nashville, Tennessee is not easy. Why is it not easy? Well, kosher food. Very simple. Very simple. I just got back from a beautiful vacation in the land of Israel, and on every street corner, there's kosher steakhouses, there's kosher burger houses, there's kosher Italian restaurants, there's kosher shawarma, pita, laffa, hummus, tahina, everything, everywhere. And then I come back to Nashville, Tennessee, driving by a McDonald's I can't have, driving by an Italian restaurant I can't have, by Burger King, by Subway, by Cane's. Before I converted, Cane's was can't have it anymore. So kosher is a very hard one for me personally because I'm in Nashville. In Nashville, it's not easy to be Jewish, or not easy to keep kosher. But one that I carry with me in my day today, you do so many that it's hard to like pinpoint one because, it's not optional to do the commandments. Like, you have to. And I don't do all of them. I'll admit, I don't do all of them. I'm not a perfect Jew. There are some, very specific ones that I haven't even learned about yet, that I don't keep yet, that I need to. But I would say probably what I mentioned earlier, the commandment of wrapping the tefillin with the boxes. Like, yeah, I keep kosher and I, observe the Sabbath. I don't use electronics on the Sabbath. I think the wrapping the boxes is the best one for me, because that, it's like it connects me to God while I pray, and that itself is a commandment. And I think it's the most beautiful, because it's like a declaration. It's a declaration of my promise to God that I'll follow Him, and you do it every single morning except for Saturday.
And in your response, you kind of hinted that your conversion was more recent, or when did you convert?
Yeah, it was recent. Finished it, I want to say a year and a half ago.
Okay, and it was a 3-year process going back. So how old were you when you decided you wanted to take your faith more seriously?
Let's see, I was around 19 years old. 19,
Okay.
19, 20. Yeah, so I grew up in a, and you and I have spoken about this before. So there's three different denominations of Judaism. You have Reform, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. Orthodox is also an umbrella term. They have like Hasidic, but they all fall under like the Orthodox umbrella of religious Jews. I used to grow up under Reform Judaism, which, to describe the three denominations quickly, Orthodox is the, I'm going to seem biased. Orthodox is the true one, because it follows the commandments as they are supposed to be followed. But the names of the two denominations explain what they are. So conservative is they're conservative, they conserve some of the commandments. And then reform is just they reform the need to do the commandments. So they say, we don't need to do that one. Oh, we don't need to do that one. We're a lot more liberal in our understanding. They embrace modernity and kind of reject the traditional view that you need to keep all the commandments. So when I was growing up, because I wouldn't have been accepted as a Jew in Orthodox circles because only my father was Jewish, we went to a Reformed synagogue. And in the Reformed synagogue, the people that I grew up in this Reformed synagogue, by the way, I love them to death. They're my friends still today. They're great people. I don't really align politically with many of them anymore. But it was just a lot less of a religious adherence to the commandments. And then when I was 19, 20, I began reading into more religious Jewish law. And then the moment that I read about the matrilineal descent rule in Jewish law, to tell you how I described it to my rabbi when I told him I wanted to convert, it was like my entire life I was wearing a mask and it had just gotten ripped off and I didn't know who I was looking at in the mirror. Like, that's how it felt to me. Because I grew up with a Jewish identity. I did Jewish holidays in the home. I went to synagogue quite frequently. I went to like Torah school every Sunday. Like, it was, and that happened. So I told the rabbi, I was like, I can't live like this. I can't, I have a Jewish identity. I can't live with a Jewish identity knowing I'm not Jewish. It's like, come on. So eventually I did my conversion and I finished about a year and a half ago.
Well, how did you come to that realization though? Like, what was the moment?
Well, just as many people do, learning about new things, I read, and I started reading into the more traditional. Really, what sparked it off was I had taken a trip to Los Angeles, and I was sitting at the airport, and across from me was a religious Jewish man. He had the black hat, the black everything, the this and that. I was like, what's different between me and him? So I started really reading into the philosophy that traditional Judaism holds, and I came across the patrilineal rule established by Ezra, and that's what I was like, what, So yeah, it wasn't. I'll tell you, man, it wasn't easy. I mean, when I told my dad about it, my dad was kind of, he, from when I started my conversion to when I finished it, he was the most supportive person, my dad. But, when I first told him, he understood. He understood why I was hurting, and I'm glad that he was supportive throughout it. But yeah, man, it wasn't easy for me when I found out. It was probably one of the most painful things I've gone through in my life, I would say.
Was there, I guess I just wonder, because why do you think it happened in your early 20s or right before you were 20? You said 19.
It's a good question because when I was a Reformed Jew, I told you there wasn't very strict adherence to religious ideals. Before I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, when I was in Los Angeles, I mean, bro, I was a party guy. You'd see me on college campuses shotgunning White Claws and, dancing to house music with a bunch of girls. That was my upbringing. I was in California, and I wasn't religious, but, I had a friend ask me, because it was someone from my friend group. He asked me when he saw me going through this process, like he saw me not really doing as much as I used to, going out, not partying really much anymore, not, pursuing girls really in the way that I used to. And he was like, dude, he's like, I get it. You want to be Jewish, but like, why don't you do it when you're like 30? Why don't you do it like, you're 20? Like, you live in Nashville, go to Broadway, like go pick up girls, go do something. But like I told you earlier in the interview, a Jewish person doesn't become Jewish through conversion. They've always had a Jewish soul. And my Jewish soul was just pulling me, man. It was tugging me towards finishing the conversion. It felt like no matter what I did, I'll tell you, my rabbi sat across from me and he asked me the same question you did. Why in your 20s do you want to do this? And he also asked me why, you could go eat a cheeseburger and be just fine in the eyes of God, everything like that. And throughout all that, logically, he's right. Logically, why wouldn't I do this later? I could go have my fun right now and not have a guilty conscience about it. But you know what? Something was pulling me. Logic got subdued by whatever was inside of me pulling me to do it. So I did it.
I appreciate you being so open with me because
Yeah,
I guess I was raised Christian, but I went in my 20s. I'm still in my 20s, but in my early 20s, I kept going back and forth between atheism and belief, just because it was more like a spiteful agnosticism where you don't really know where you stand and you're asking for answers and you don't feel you're getting them. And then fairly recently in my life, I had something happen that, at least for me, confirmed that I believe in God. And it resonates in the same way that you were just talking about, where it was just something very deep inside me that made me feel like I wasn't alone. And that's a weird feeling to have, like, nothing before that. And then this almost like, I don't know what to call it. It's not like I heard the voice of God, but it was just that a presence that was like, kind of made this wholeness kind of feeling. You're like, okay, there's something outside myself that feels like, and that at least gives me the basis.
Look, bro, the very thing, and look, you have your flesh, right? Your body, stuff like that. But the thing that allows you to move it is your soul, and your soul is directly connected to God. So whether you consciously want to say you're disconnected from him or you're alone or whatever, you're not. The very essence of you is God. He's with you all the time. And it's, like you are never, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you are the homeless guy under the bridge in Seattle, Washington, or you're the Pope in Rome. Like, God is with you all the time, every second of the day, because you are his creation. There is no such case of a person that doesn't have God. It's just, are they willing to accept it? Are they willing to reach out to him is the question. And sometimes it takes God reaching out first, which it sounds like might have happened to you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too, because I think before that thing happened to me, I was kind of in the thinking of, it shouldn't be so clouded or convoluted. And I think this is more a mistake of people, not necessarily the religions. But there is this kind of idea in some of the churches and religious people I've met in my life where they kind of say what you just did, but with a bit more condescension, where they go, well, if you don't feel him, you're not trying hard enough. It's your fault, basically. And I've always felt like that is such an awful thing to tell somebody who's trying to find a connection like that, and they're struggling. So I do wonder, what would you say to somebody who hasn't had that, me a couple of years ago? And it's sort of like saying, oh, well, you just got to wait for it. You got to try harder. Like, how do you help someone with hopelessness in that situation?
Well, I think one of the ways to really do it is self-reflection on the inside. So, one of the reasons that many people don't find God, and I'm not saying it's everybody, but I'm saying it's a lot of people who, identify with this type of, agnostic, atheist, worldview. Again, I'm not saying everyone. I'm not saying it was like you, but many people, they don't really practice a life of virtue. And when you don't practice a life of virtue and you don't do things that would seem godly, you can feel disconnected from God. I despite having a Jewish identity and, going to a Reform synagogue and stuff like that, when I told you I was going out and partying with girls, not really caring, going out Saturdays, whatever, I didn't feel very connected to God. I went and I opened a book and I said a couple prayers at the synagogue and stuff like that, but that didn't make my connection to God, really strong. It was only really when I tapped in and said, God, I know what you expect from me and I know what you want me to do. So let me try to act like it. And as I started acting like it, I became connected to him. But the issue is, people shouldn't take my anecdote as, an example for what they should do, because everyone's journey is different. But I would say searching for how to live a more virtuous life might help with that connection a little bit. But he is there. And if you don't feel him now, I guess the advice I would give is, if you don't feel him now, at least adhere to what I'm telling you. Listen to what I'm telling you now and understand that he is there, even if you don't feel him. He is there. And it might be annoying that you can't feel him right now, but he's right there next to you. And if you start doing some internal reflection, God willing, he'll help you find what that thing is that it's kind of preventing you from living the virtuous life, and he'll connect with you. That's my advice. Again, a human's connection with God is extremely intimate and very specific per person. So any advice I could give won't work for everybody. But I would definitely say that internal reflection would help a lot of people.
I think the other thing you said is actually pretty good advice. Just the idea of trying to live more virtuously, like I could see that being pragmatically applied in the sense that, well, if you're sitting alone in a room cursing God and wondering why he's not speaking to you, what is that going to do but have you spiral into depression? If you feel hopeless, but then you push through that and say, I don't know, go help the homeless, or go do something that might, even if it feels like on a surface level, like, oh, this is the virtuous thing people do, that's a start. And maybe that can get you there. My thing came through more of a family tragedy that I didn't really know how to grapple with. But yeah, no, I like that advice. I think that's a good starting place for people who might be like wondering, why am I alone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let's switch to something a little bit more fun. Can you tell me about Jewish lore?
Jewish lore?
Oh, yes. I was Googling the cryptids. I'm hoping you can tell me about them. Maybe the Golem?
I'll tell you about I'll be honest with you, Jewish lore, it's, when you say lore, are you talking about, King David, King Solomon, all the figures in the Bible, or are you talking about stuff like the Golem and the Dybbuk?
Oh, I'm talking about cryptids. Yeah, I wouldn't deign to call the Bible stories lore. I know people will take offense to that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the Golem specifically. So the Golem in Jewish mysticism is it's a being that they make out of clay, and then they write on their head, I believe it's the word Esh, I think.
What does that mean? Like life?
It means like fire or light. It might actually be Shaddai, which is one of the names of God. I don't remember off the top of my head, but in Jewish mysticism, it's a figure that people made. I personally wouldn't try to make one because I don't know anyone that's tried.
What was the purpose? Why would somebody make a golem, and who would be the people that would do it?
The reason so there's one particular story that I remember reading a long time ago in a Jewish I want to say like history book, but there was some urban legend in there as well, and it was I believe during the time of the Inquisition when Jews were being persecuted, and there was a small Jewish village who was scared that they were going to get blamed for, I believe it was poisoning the wells or something, and they decided to build a golem to protect them from the the Spaniards as they were approaching their village, and they protected them and killed all the Spaniards. So I guess that would be one reason to do it. I assume, Jewish history. You can look in in certain works from like the Second Temple era and stuff like that. The name of God specifically. There are many of them. There's the ineffable name that I can't say as a Jew.
Do you know how to pronounce it?
I know, but I can't. It's like against
enough.
Jewish law for me too. Like with the name of God, you can create miracles. That was something that it's not. I wouldn't call it magic because it's not it's just using God's name to create amazing things. The average person shouldn't do it, and it's not really common today, but it used to be back during the Temple era. So, do I believe in golems? I mean, like I said, the name of God can be used. So if you write the name of God on the forehead of a clay thing, I wouldn't be surprised if it came alive. But
is there a downside to it? Is there a curse aspect to summoning a golem? And is it Golem or Golem? I know one of them's a Lord of the Rings character, but I don't know if he's named after.
Probably Golem. To be honest with you, the only pronunciation I know is Golem, and that's just because they had him in Minecraft when I was a kid. So
getting represented. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I know it's frowned upon to do stuff like that, but I don't know how. Again, this is a very, very you got to do a lot of research into this aspect to know a lot. And I'll just admit with you, man, I'm not the most knowledgeable when it comes to golems specifically. I know that the way that you would destroy a golem is you just simply wipe the word off of their head.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then they would return to dust. So is that the end of it? I don't know.
Have you ever seen the silent film from the 30s?
I can't say I have.
That's a wild watch. I'll show some footage of it here, but you should check that out. It's actually considered, if not the first, one of the earliest horror films and horror franchises, because they made like 2 or 3 of the movies. And the second and third one, I believe, are lost, but the first one still exists partially. It's really wild looking.
You said it's about a golem?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact specific plot, but I'm kind of thinking it might be, and I'll put something on screen if I'm wrong, but I think it might actually be that instance you said of the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, it's like that is probably the most famous story of like them erecting them, but there are many of them like throughout Jewish history. Like Europe was not a good place for the Jews in the middle centuries, but also in like Arab countries, Muslim countries during like the Caliphate. There are many different stories about it. I want to look up real quick. I want to make sure correct myself. Okay. So the word on the golem's head is actually emet, which means truth.
Oh, interesting.
So this is even more interesting. So it says that you write the word emet on the head and it becomes erect. And then to destroy it, you just erase the sound because you're left with the word met, which means dead.
Oh, that's interesting.
Interesting. Wow.
I wonder why truth and dead are so close together that you can erase a letter.
I don't know, because life is truth and death is the end. I don't know. The rabbis, the rabbis are known for there's something called gematria, which is like the value of numbers in each letter, and it's like something that I can't even begin to understand.
I know what you're talking about. I spoke to a rabbi about this. I didn't understand it, but he was finding all sorts of things in the text where it would link to like diseases they didn't know about when they wrote it and stuff like that.
They know how to look very deep into the scriptures and writings and find stuff out. So the word truth, the reason they put it on the golem's head might be some very, very, very specific thing that I just don't know, but I just can't tell you about. You got to think about it. If you go to like New York today, right, or Jerusalem, or Atlanta, or you'll see these places called yeshivas, where you have these young Jewish boys sitting over a table, bobbing their heads, reading over and over and over again the scriptures, over and over and over and over, and typically religious Jews, they graduate from the yeshiva and they become rabbis or what have it be, and they do this all day, every day for their entire lives. Now think about that happening since they were exiled from the Second Temple in 70 CE. They're going to notice stuff in the letters, So these people, the knowledge that they have is absolutely it's phenomenal. That's why I also get kind of angry when I see people trying to say they understand Judaism, specifically anti-Semites, trying to say they understand anti-Semitism, or they understand Judaism better than a Jew does, when the Jews have been doing this for 2,000 years and still have questions. You know what I mean?
I love that statement. Actually, that's a great one. 2,000 years and still have questions. Speaking of questions, I have more cryptids I want to ask about.
Sure.
Do you know anything about the Dybbuk?
Ooh, have you seen, there's a movie about it, I think like in 2012 that came out. It was a really famous movie.
A Serious Man?
No. I think it was like
the whole film is about it.
Really?
Oh, no, I was asking, because A Serious Man, the first scene in the movie is a Dybbuk, and then it cuts to the future. No, you see this interaction.
I think it's just called The Possession. I could be wrong.
Okay, so it's like a horror movie about it.
Yeah,
cool.
No. Yeah, it was a horror movie. Relatively new, but it was about the Dybbuk. But there's one specific case, a recent case that I'll tell you about, to the best of my memory. So first, a Dybbuk, it descends from a Hebrew word which means attachment, and there are many different interpretations of what a Dybbuk is, but they all revolve around kind of the same idea, which is it is a soul that did not complete their mission in life, or they did something really bad in life, and they did not get to go to the next world, Olam Haba, the world to come, like heaven, as you would call it. And they're like a wandering, lost soul, kind of demon-like in the in our world. And when somebody that's alive makes a sin, they kind of open a door for this soul to like grasp onto them briefly. And like they're in like apparently the mission of the Dybbuk, the soul that's grasped on, is to kind of merge themselves with that body, so that if that body completes like something good in their life, that soul can like be part of it and then go up. But it's not good for the host.
Oh.
It's not good for the host person because they start to behave different. It's like a possession. You know what a possession is, obviously.
Yeah, so it's like trying to ride the coattails into the afterlife.
Exactly. Now there's one like specific story about it that's actually relatively recent. I believe the early 2000s, where there was somebody that claimed that they had a Dybbuk in a box. They had one trapped in a box. And that's what the movie in 2012 was about. It was about the Dybbuk box. And it was basically a guy who claimed he had a box that was owned by like Holocaust survivors, and inside of it was a Dybbuk, a cursed soul trapped. And this guy decided to sell it on eBay in like the early 2000s, I believe. And he sold it to somebody. He explained to them that it was, there's a damned soul in it or whatever, and came from a Holocaust survivor. And it went through a couple of people, and every person that owned it was like coughing up blood. Some people had a seizure. Some people had this. Just terrible things were happening to all the people that owned it, until it ended up in the possession of, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was like a famous TV guy. There was he had a museum for like ghost hunting and like possessed things, right? And it ended up in this guy's museum. Now, this is what's crazy. This story, it stuck with me. It's insane. There's a famous video. Maybe if you're going to be editing this, you could like overlay it from YouTube or whatever. But there's a famous video. Post Malone was friends with the guy that owns this museum, and they decided, Post Malone was like, "Yo, bro, I want to check out that Dybbuk box." So the guy's like, "Yeah, come here, I'll show it to you." So they go, and they check out the Dybbuk box, and the guy that owns the museum touches it, and he completely loses control of his body. Like he can't move. He can't move. And he said somebody was telling him to touch one hand on the box and the other hand to touch Post Malone to like kind of like create like a connection to like do it. And I believe the guy does touch Post Malone. And Post Malone like has to grab this guy and like throw him out of the room to like, because the guy can't move. He has no connection over his body. And then a couple of days later, Post Malone's tires on his plane popped, and his plane almost crashed. And then a few days after that, he got in a car accident that almost killed him. So it's.
So are you saying that there's a good chance Post Malone is being haunted by a Dybbuk?
I wouldn't say anymore, because I believe the possessions are very short term. I don't know though. I'm just saying TMZ was all over the story. The video, I remember seeing it years ago. I have to go back and watch it again. But bro, it's scary. Like Post Malone looks like freaking so scared, pulling his friend out, and the box is just there, and the guy just like, he doesn't know what he's doing. Like he can't. Yeah, man, it's wild. Inside of the box, someone opened it. There was like a stone that said the word shalom, which means many different things. It means peace, but it also means hello. It means goodbye. Shalom has many different meanings. There's also like a candlestick inside of it. I don't know who put the box together and who added that stuff in it, but yeah, man, it's pretty scary story. But that Post Malone thing, it's like that really brought the concept of the book into, along with the movie, into like the mainstream.
Yeah, I had never heard that story. That's wild. I
Yeah,
hope Post is all right.
Yeah, 100%. The video's everywhere. You can look it up yourself.
Yeah, I'll have to find it.
Yeah,
What about the Leviathan?
Leviathan.
Isn't that like a beast of some kind?
Yeah, the Leviathan. It's referenced in certain Jewish folklore. It's like I believe that's the underwater serpent, big serpent. It's I believe it might be briefly mentioned in scripture, actually. But sightings of it, I mean, you got the Loch Ness monster, popping up. This is the kind of thing with like, with like not only the Bible, but like just, mysticism as well. When there are stories like this, like say you just take ones from like Jewish folklore, you have sightings of them outside of Jewish folklore. Like let's say the Leviathan, is some sea monster or whatever. You have the Loch Ness monster. You have that one guy that flew over the sea in Australia. I believe it was a sea in Australia. It might have been like a lake, that claimed that he saw a sea snake that was like the size of a building. Like, it's like they appear in different cultures. So yeah, man, it could be out there. I believe we've only discovered like, what was it, like 5% of the ocean, or like 10% of the
Oh
ocean.
yeah, and they try to map it, but it's sort of
So you never
quite a
know.
steep challenge.
There could be something under the water, but I just, man, there's
So
not
there's
much
nothing
more you
too
can say.
specific about that one. It's just why is it in the faith? What's the story around them?
I could tell you. I could find the exact verse for you. But it's
Because it's like, the other ones I kind of get. Golem, Dybbuk, those sound like folklore type creatures that I can understand. But then you just have like a kaiju,
kaiju.
the
Yeah,
Jewish
man.
kaiju. Let's get
Yeah.
Leviathan in here.
So it looks like in Job chapter 41, can you pull in a Leviathan with a fish hook, or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose, or a pierce in its jaw with a hook if it's begging you for mercy? Yeah, I mean, it looks like they dealt with them in the biblical, but I don't know if it's like the same, because here it sounds like they're just talking about like
Big fish.
a big fish, like a whale. But in our culture, the Leviathan is like a fire-breathing fish dragon, So it's like, yeah, man, I don't know.
Well, okay. Let me ask, because this one's not quite a cryptid, more of a character that I think people have taken and it becomes one. But I'm curious if you could parse that out for me. Who is Lilith?
Lilith is I believe kind of like I want to say demon, maybe, that was like present. It was like apparently one of Adam's wives during the time of creation.
And that's the interesting point. Why don't people know that broadly?
I actually don't believe she's mentioned anywhere in the Bible. I think it's like in the I think maybe the Zohar. Let me see. Lilith. I doubt there's anywhere in the Bible.
Yeah, because I don't think it mentions Lilith being created, like in the same story that it does Adam and Eve.
Yeah, so Lilith is mentioned very briefly in Isaiah 34, but it doesn't really explain much about her. It just says, "There too Lilith shall repose and find a place to rest," and that is it. It doesn't give you much context about who she is. It's really I believe, spoken about in the Talmud.
And is that where they get the extra lore that she's like a demon, or I've heard vampire queen?
Okay, I don't think Jews believe in the vampires, whose weakness is garlic, but and like suck on human blood. But let me see. Lilith, also spelled Lilith, is a female figure in Mesopotamian Jewish mythology, theorized to be the first wife of Adam in a okay, so she's a demon. Lilith is cited as having been banished from the Garden of Eden for not complying with and obeying Adam. It's taken from the book of Isaiah and was written about in Jewish sources from 500 AD onward. She's mentioned in the Babylonian Talmud and in the Zohar as a hot, fiery female who first cohabited with man. But many of the rabbinical authorities, including Maimonides, which is like the biggest rabbinical authority, to like the biggest rabbi in memory, like most of our Jewish law comes through the opinions of Maimonides. Well, not the law, but like many of the Jewish, law opinions are based off of Maimonides, and they all reject the existence of Lilith.
Okay.
They don't believe that she was real.
Well, that was the last cryptid I had. Now,
good, because that is not a place the Dybbuk I'll tell you about all day, because it's Post Malone. I'm a very big fan of Post Malone, so that story I know very specifically about.
So through him, your faith was enriched.
Yeah.
Thank you, Post Malone.
Thank you, Post Malone. I guess you could say that, but it's also like, I told you, like, as a convert, remember I told you there's 613 commandments. I started my conversion 3 years ago. I told you people have been studying for 2,000 years. They still have questions. I'm still studying these 613 commandments. The day-to-day ones I know about, and I'm learning and I'm expanding, but I gotta, before you run, you gotta walk, So I'm sure I'll get into all those things eventually, but, still a big learning process for me.
Well, you seem quite knowledgeable to me, man. And
I appreciate it.
one thing at the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about the three different realms of Judaism. We talked about race, we talked about religion, we just went through lore. Now we need to talk about the nation of Israel.
Hmm.
How does that come into the fold?
Well, I mean, are you talking about the modern nation state of Israel that exists today, or are you talking about the nation of Israel from the Bible?
I guess it would make sense to explain the nation of Israel from the Bible so we can understand how that shapes into the one today or if they're even the same.
Yeah, so it all starts with a man named Abraham, which is the first patriarch of the Abrahamic religions. Um, in this isn't found in the Bible, but this is found in a in like a an extra biblical Jewish writing, and it says that there's a story about Abraham. Like, so Abraham is in the Bible. He's like the first patriarch of all of the three Abrahamic religions. But the reason why he was chosen by God isn't in the Bible, but it's Jewish tradition explains the story like this, and it's a great story. He lived in a time where everybody was polytheists. Everyone believed in all these different gods. And then Abraham, his father, owned an idol shop. He just sold idols.
Really? I actually I've never heard that.
Obviously, like so I have King David right here, right? This isn't an idol, this isn't a god, but they had stuff like this that people would go and they would bow down to, and they would give sacrifices to, and what have you. And his dad owned a shop of idols, and one day the dad had to leave the shop. He had to go into town for something, and he asked Abraham to stay there and wait. Abraham was sitting there, and he saw people coming and giving, sacrifices and offerings to these stones, and he was like, what the hell is going on here? What is this? This makes no sense to me. So what he did was he bashed and he destroyed all of the idols inside of the store except for one, and he put all the offerings in front of it. And when his dad came back, his dad's like, what the hell happened? Why is everything destroyed? And he said, oh, well, all of the idols, they started to argue over the offerings, and only the strongest one remained. And his dad's like, what are you talking about? They're rocks. And Abraham was like, exactly, they're rocks. And then the story goes on. This is called a midrash, by the way. It's like an extra biblical story of like oral tradition of what happened in certain parts of the Bible that aren't explained. But and he's like, there's like it keeps going on. Like I believe someone said, oh, you have to pray to like the, I don't know. It's a long, complicated story. But anyway, Abraham like defied the polytheistic worldview, and it goes on to like him bashing people who worship the sun, him bashing people who worship the clouds, him bashing people that worship this and that. So because of that, God chose him, and then Abraham has God goes to Abraham, and he has his wife named Sarah, and Sarah's very old. She's in her 90s, and Abraham is old as well. And God says, "You're gonna have a kid." And he's like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm going to have a kid. Look how old I am. I'm going to have a kid. And God's like, yeah, you're going to have a kid. And and Sarah was like, what are you talking about? I'm going to have a kid. Like, look at me. I'm old. I'm not going to have a kid.
I bet she was terrified.
Yeah, she was terrified. But she didn't believe it. And God was like, I'll show you. And Isaac was the name of the child. He's the second patriarch of Judaism. Isaac had two children, Jacob and Esau, or Esau, however you want to pronounce it. And Jacob had a bunch of different sons, all of whom there's a story of like they sold one of the sons in Joseph into slavery, and all of them ended up in Egypt eventually. Right, like I'm skipping many of the interworkings of the story. All of them ended up in Egypt, and the Egyptians eventually enslaved them, and that nation of slaves remained in Egypt for hundreds of years until a man named Moses came along, exiled them, did 10 plagues, forced the Egyptians to let them go. So you have this nation, the nation of Israel, going through the desert. Now I'll backtrack a little bit. The way that they got the name Israel, the nation of Israel, is because there was Jacob, the last son of those three I told you, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He wrestled with an angel, and the angel renamed him Israel after that fight. So anyway, this nation is traveling through the desert.
And what does Israel mean?
So the name Israel means to struggle with God. And that was because, Jacob, when he was wrestling with the angel, struggled with an angel of God. So, the name basically makes sense. So that nation, that name Israel stuck with his sons as they went to Egypt, and then they went to the desert. And Moses took them and And they went to Sinai. They got the Torah, the Ten Commandments, and God instructed them to go into the land of Canaan and establish the land of Israel, the Promised Land, is many people call it.
And that's where modern day Israel is.
So the biblical Promised Land is actually bigger than the modern state of Israel's borders, but the area that the modern state of Israel is today does comprise part of what that Promised Land is. Yeah. But they resided there, and that nation, obviously there was the exile where they ended up all over the world, but they still remained with their identity to the nation that once was, that traveled through the desert. I travel through my father. My descendants go all the way back to the people that were in the desert. The Jew that lives across the street from me, he tracks his descendants all the way back to those people that were in the desert with Moses. The Ethiopian Jews do the same thing. The Jews in Asia do the same thing. The Jews in Egypt do the same thing. Spain, yada, 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 yada. Every Jew that you will ever come across traces his lineage back to those Jews who wandered the desert with Moses. So that's like the nation part.
Are there any that are linked to the Jews you mentioned who stayed in Egypt? Does anyone know who they are?
I assume that those Jews, their memory has been forgotten. I don't think they made it out. If anything, I mean, there might be an argument to be made that says, potentially maybe some of the people that descend from the ancient Egyptians have like Jewish blood in them. But again, the nationhood of the Jewish people, they really became a nation with that identity at Mount Sinai after they left Egypt. Like they had the descendants being from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but really like who the Jewish people are, the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, that really came into fruition with the giving of the Torah and the Ten Commandments.
Okay, so that moment marked a change. So how do we come to modern day Israel? Obviously, World War II happens.
Yeah, but it was even before that. So it has always been a belief in the Jewish religion that they want to return to the land of Israel. I mean, theologically, we have to believe that because our faith calls on it. Our faith calls from a messianic age where every Jew is in the land of Israel and we're worshiping God and the Messiah is there and the temple standing. Every single year we have a holiday called Passover where there's a Seder. It's like a feast. And we say, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, which means next year in Jerusalem. We say that every year. We've been saying that for hundreds of years, thousands of years. We've always wanted to yearn to return home. But again, we've been in the diaspora. The Romans kicked us out in 70 CE. So we've lived all over the world. Now, a man named Theodor Herzl was around in the, I believe, late 1800s, early 1900s. Maybe it was just late 1800s. And he came with the political manifestation of that want, known as Zionism. And at first, Theodor Herzl was completely secular. The way that his story started was he was a writer in, I believe it was somewhere in Europe. He was a writer, and it was France, I believe, and there was an officer named Officer Dreyfus. He was writing about this thing that was going on with this guy named Officer Dreyfus, who's a high officer in the French army, and he got accused of being a spy. And what happened? The people of France didn't direct their outrage towards this man who, besides this accusation, was a very respectable general in the French Navy. They became anti-Semitic. They said, oh, he's a Jew. It's because he's a Jew. He's a Jew. He's a Jew. He's a Jew. So Theodor Herzl realized very quickly it doesn't matter how respected you are in society. If you're a Jew, you can't, we're not safe. He had many bad ideas before he decided he wanted to rebuild the state of Israel. The first one was he wanted all the Jews to convert to Christianity. He said, you know what? If we all convert to Christianity, no one will know we're Jews. We'll be fine. Then he quickly realized that wouldn't work because then there was hatred of Jews based on race. Then he had the idea that we should all move to someplace in Africa instead of Israel. All the Jews around the world is like, what the hell are you talking about, Africa? We're from Israel. We should go back to Israel if we're going to go anywhere and make a state. So the state of Israel was formed, and in 1948 because of his philosophy, but largely it was because the world realized that after the Holocaust that he was right. Like, we were not safe anywhere. 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust. May their memory be a blessing. And the world really knew after that, specifically the United Kingdom, who had control over this place called the Mandate of Palestine, They really realized, they were like, yeah, these people deserve it. And it was ultimately the UN who was asked by England that came up with the plan that created the state of Israel. So they really, I don't want to say it was just the Holocaust that caused it, because as a Jew, I have like a theological belief that it was God that, kind of facilitated in making it happen. But
Right, and even in the material world, it seems you've already said there's a lot of different factors at play.
yeah,
Obviously,
exactly.
thousands of years of history building up to this Herzl character who tried to put it down into writing what should be done.
Mm-hmm.
Holocaust happens, gives a
Exactly.
substantive reason to the rest of the world to actually recognize it.
Exactly.
Okay, so then what does the word Zionism actually mean?
Zionism simply means that you believe that Jewish people have a right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. People like to throw all these different definitions around it, but that is the simple definition of it. People will say, "Oh no, a Zionist is someone who is part of this huge global cabal who wants to push transgenderism on your kid," and they say, it's also like anti-Arab racism, or that. No, it simply just means you believe that Jewish people have a right to self-determination within the borders of the land that they are indigenous to. I don't like using that word indigenous because it's kind of like progressive mumbo jumbo, but it's true. Like, Jewish people are from the land of Israel, nowhere else.
Is the transgender cabal thing a reference to the conspiracy that Jews run the media?
It
Because I'm
is.
trying to figure out how that links into it.
Yeah, to be honest with you, it's like people hate Jews so much. They come up with these such complex conspiracy theories about how, like, my babushka, my grandma, like, ruined their life. It's like, it's kind of hard to track. But apparently, the essence of it is like, there's some global cabal of international Jews who control all of the media and control everything that your eyes feast upon that is, outside, like, that's produced, like, film, literature, education, everything is controlled by this global cabal of Jews, and they're all Zionists, and the reason they're pushing all of this stuff is to, destroy, society so that Israel can be stronger than everyone, or something like that. And it's just not true. It's not true. It's you can't even like I can't even like explain to you like why it's not true, because it's like just so like so outlandish. You know what I mean? Like, people will look at me. I'm a young 23-year-old man. I just believe that my people should live where they are indigenous to, where they are from, and be safe there, because history has shown we're not safe anywhere else. I get people in my mentions on social media telling me that I am somehow related to some Jew that lived in pre-Nazi Germany that was pushing transgenderism, or I am related to the Rothschilds family, or I am related to some porn director in Los Angeles that happens to be ethnically Jewish. Like, they all think that everything is connected. There is no connection here. Zionism is just simply a belief that people hold, like anything else, and there's no greater conspiracy around it. Are there powerful Zionists? Are there terrible people? Terrible people who are Zionists? Absolutely. Are they in positions of power? Absolutely. But I, as a Zionist, a religious Jewish Zionist who believe that, my people should be where they are, I will go with you to throw these people in jails for breaking decency laws. They just think if you believe that the Jewish people have a right to exist where they are, you believe in all this other stuff that all these bad Zionists do. I'm telling you, I know so many different people who have, like, well, I don't want to say I know of. I've read stories of people who, they go with, like, I wear my Jewish chain on my neck. People have worn crosses on their necks, and they've done terrible things. Am I supposed to say all Christians are bad? They believe in that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because I know that's not what Christianity believes, and I know that's also not what the bulk of my Christian friends believe. But unfortunately, since Jews are such a radical minority of people, we get looped in, and it's unfair.
Let me go back to the word Zionist, because it definitely gets thrown around like it's a dirty word, and I don't think it should be. But I'm curious, the word Zion, what is that a reference to?
It's the biblical word for the word Jerusalem.
Okay, and Jerusalem is encompassed in Israel.
Jerusalem is the holiest city in Judaism, and it is the capital of the modern nation state of Israel. Yeah, as it was the capital of the biblical.
Okay.
Israel.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that because I was curious, because I think a lot of people hear a word, they don't, and then they probably don't think, what is Zion even?
Yeah, Zion is Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. Also, it's a fun fact, that's the last human city in the Matrix films.
Really?
Yeah, I always thought that was funny. And then the people who created that movie ended up being transgender.
Unfortunate.
It's all connected. They're
It's all
right.
connected.
They're right,
They're right.
Jacob.
Where it's all part of a cabal. The signs are right in front of you. You just got to see them.
Yep. I will say this though about I don't even understand the argument about does Israel have the right to exist? And I do see a video that someone will put out with just that title, and it always gets like 1 million views, and people want to go in there and leave their comments about it. Isn't it true that a country's right to exist is really just down to two things? They claim they exist, and then they can defend the claim. What more is there to a country? I understand it gets muddied with the ethno state and religion, but ultimately a country is just that.
Well, I mean, it really depends on who's defining the terms, because the Palestinians, they claim that they exist, a Palestinian state, but there is no Palestinian state.
So right, they can't defend their claim.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, they can defend it, but it's like my entire thing when people say, "Does Israel have a right to exist?" I can argue that all day long, and you know what? I'll give you my answer to why we have the right to exist in a second. But every time someone tells me that, I don't answer them why we have the right to exist. I tell them we do exist. And I say, let's say for a second we decide Israel doesn't have the right to exist. Practically, what does that mean? Say you'd completely disband the state of Israel today, right? You want to return it to the Palestinians? Which ones? The ones in Gaza that elected Hamas, a terrorist organization that calls for it gives like this prophecy that one day Jews are going to hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will call out, oh Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him. That's in the covenant of Hamas, the original covenant of Hamas. You want those Palestinians to be able to have control of Jews? Or what about the Palestinians in the West Bank who elected the Palestinian Authority? Mahmoud Abbas, one of the most famous Holocaust deniers alive today. It's like, who also does pay for slay, where they pay terrorists to go into Israel and kill people. Like, even if you say that Israel doesn't have a right to exist, there is no way to disband it without all of these Jews dying. There's not. You cannot integrate these different populations of people who, I always, sometimes I get flack for this. It's not really a politically correct thing to say. All cultures are not created equal. The culture, the more westernized culture inside the state of Israel, it's westernized. Like, there's many Western-ish values in the state of Israel, but we also have our rich Jewish culture. There's Arabs who live there who have certain Arab culture, but the cultures outside of Israel, on any side of their border, whether it be Gaza, whether it be the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, etc., that's a culture largely of death, of radical Islamism. It's insane. It's insane. One of the people that I love the most in this world is my uncle. His name is Ron. I'm not going to give his last name. His name is Ron. He lives in Tel Aviv. He's a gay man. Lives in Tel Aviv. If the Palestinian Authority, or if Hamas, or if any Islamist organization took over Israel tomorrow because these Western white girl liberals decided that Israel doesn't have a right to exist, he wouldn't be alive. He wouldn't be alive. As well as, let's say that they look over the fact that everyone in Israel, like all these people in Israel, are Jewish that would be killed instantly. He would be killed not only for being Jewish, but for being gay. So it's like the practical side of saying Israel doesn't have a right to exist is disbanding it, and there is no way you can disband the state of Israel without the people being killed. That's it.
Yeah, that's sort of like when people like Jordan Peterson will bring up how they want to have less people on the planet, and then they go, okay, well, follow that through logically. What does that mean if we're going to having less people on the planet? Who goes, and how do we decide that, and how does that not just become a huge genocide? I also think I'm not so educated on, obviously, everything going on in the Middle East, all the countries, all the conflict. It's all super complex, almost astronomically to most typical Westerners. But if the Palestinians were allowed to take Israel, would that not cause unrest? Because the Palestinians aren't really welcome in any of the other countries around them. Egypt doesn't want to let them in. And if they control the holiest of holies, would they not just get swarmed by all the other countries around them because they can't have the Holy Land?
Well, no, really. So the way that these people think is they think that most of the Muslim countries, they see Muslim control as being just part of this larger Muslim empire. There's inner fighting in between it, but as long as it's controlled by Islam, then they don't have an issue with it. They in 1948 when they invaded, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, they didn't invade Israel to try and destroy it because they wanted to, conquer it for their own countries. They just wanted to give it back to the Palestinians. Not give it back because they never controlled it, but they wanted to give it to the Palestinians. So no, I don't think the reason that you hear that no one likes the Palestinians in the region is because the Palestinians, instead of taking one of the many peace offerings that Israel has done and like offered them a place to build their own state, they've instead like remained refugees. And like you look at places like Lebanon, for example, Lebanon used to be a Christian country. And then the Palestinians went in there, started a revolution, and now it's a Muslim country where Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, is controlling most of it. So it's like, they don't have a good reputation, but they do within the Muslim countries, and well, they don't have a good reputation in the Muslim countries, but they're like part of that larger empire. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's if they gain control of like say Jerusalem, there's a city called Hebron. I'll start with this. There's a city called Hebron where they have the cave of the patriarchs, where you have like the Abraham is buried there, etc. Jews get shot at sometimes when they try to go visit them because it's under the control of the Palestinians, not of it's not like a very, very highly Israeli controlled area.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine if it was completely under the control of the Palestinians, a place like Jerusalem, for example, where Jews have their holiest site, the Western Wall, and the Temple Mount, and Christians have like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Like, what's going to happen? They're not going to. It's not a culture that likes sharing, So I don't know, man. It's a terrible, 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 terrible thought that they would control any land that they don't already control. Which is why, as someone who's on the right wing of things, especially when it comes to Israel, I'm against like land concessions by the Israeli government to them because it never ends in anything fruitful. Because every time you give up land to them, Jews can never go there again because they just kill any Jew that enters. It's unfortunate.
I appreciate you being open and telling me about these things. And I know, just for the viewers who might leave some vitriolic comments and say I didn't push back, I don't really have the education to, which is partially the point of this podcast, is I wanted to understand Judaism a bit better. And that obviously comes into Zionism and the modern state of it. There was something, and since we're coming into the end game of this podcast, you mentioned that you have a family member who lives in Tel Aviv who is homosexual. And I think that's interesting because part of the reason I have issue with specific religions is that most of the religions, at least that I was raised around, would have excluded somebody like that from heaven. And I also, in college, one of my best friends in the world is simply atheist. He's not spiteful. He's not anti anybody. He doesn't argue religion. He's like the most pragmatic person you'll ever meet. He works as a director of photography, so he's very technical. Just simply doesn't believe. He doesn't see proof. It's not there. So I struggle with the idea of heaven, given that he wouldn't be there, pretty much straight up. And that technically in Christianity, a gay person could just love Jesus and there you go. But still, there's a chance that they're not there. And I struggle with the idea of an afterlife where the people you love most in the world aren't present. And I just wonder what is, because I should have asked this earlier, but what is the Jewish understanding of heaven, and is it exclusive, or how does it work?
So if you read the entirety of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and you look for specific references about heaven or hell, very minimal, almost nothing. The Jewish, many of the white pearly gates interpretation of heaven and the fire burning hell interpretation that people have, that really comes from Christendom. But we do believe that there is an afterlife where good people go and where bad people go, and there's kind of like a purgatory and stuff like that. But it's not very clearly defined within Judaism. There are many different interpretations, many different opinions, but we all do agree that there is something. Now, you mentioned, people like atheists, people like, my gay uncle who I love and stuff like that. You have to understand, if I were to sit here and say your friend's not going to go to heaven, or say my uncle's not going to go to heaven, or say a rabbi that's a very holy is going to go to heaven, I'm doing something wrong because I don't make that decision. God makes that decision. I can never even remotely try to understand the most awesome and complex and ununderstandable being in the world and how he makes his decisions. He doesn't think the way we do. That being said, he gave us an outline of how we're supposed to act and what we're supposed to do and things we're supposed to do. Homosexuality is obviously prohibited in the Bible. Being atheist obviously is not good in the eyes of the Creator, who they're actively denying. But, someone who is not a homosexual and someone who is not an atheist, who does follow a lot of the Jewish commandments, I'm not perfect. So what, I could have all of these things, but I'm missing some. So am I going to go to hell because I'm missing the few? Or what about the gay person who is gay, but he keeps the commandments that I don't keep? What about that? It's not a choice. It is not a decision that any man on the planet can speak about. We have the law, which was given, which can direct us in the right way, and we can urge people to create a better chance for them to go to a good place based on what God gave us. But you will never, ever, ever hear somebody like me who believes in the Jewish faith. Obviously there are some Jews who have a different view than I do, but you will never hear someone who believes in the type of Judaism that I believe, which I believe is the mainstream view, saying like, you're going to go to hell because you're this, and this. That's not something that we do. We don't make that decision. God does. But again, we do. I do urge people to go in a certain direction. I would never say, you're fine just the way you are. I obviously, when it comes to my uncle specifically, who, I don't think he's going to see this because he's in Israel, but if he does, he knows that I love him very much. I'm obviously not, going to go up to him and be like, I don't, your way of life, I don't like that. No, I love him to death. And obviously when I wear a kippah on my head, he knows what I believe. But for other things, when people don't do it, I urge him to pray, to wrap the tefillin like I do in the morning. I urge him to do this. I urge him to do that. It's my job to try and lead them along the right path. But I'm not gonna make a definite, you're gonna go to hell or you're not. I can't do that, and nobody can, to be honest.
You said that there wasn't incredibly clear explanations of heaven and hell. What does it say about hell, and is it considered to go on forever if you were there?
So there's olam. There's two words, olam haba and sheol. Those are like the two concepts of heaven and hell. As far as I'm aware, we don't believe it's eternal damnation. It's like a area. So one of the interpretations that I am most familiar with, and I kind of grasp myself, is, I believe it's the most common one in Judaism, is that olam haba, it's like heaven. You're very close to God, and it's just like a pure joy. And, like you're just very close. Your soul is very close to him. On the opposite hand, Sheol is a place of very disconnectedness from God and like loneliness. And it's more of like a psychological pain, kind of, in a way. There are obviously, there are certain references to physical aspects of pain. Like, I believe the Talmud speaks about, boiling excrement being like a punishment, like sitting it, like it's just... But again, none of it's like clearly defined by scripture. But the disconnectedness, like part of Sheol, where you're like self-reflecting, it gives you the opportunity to self-reflect and eventually make your way. I don't believe it's eternal. Because, one of the things that I always, I never really understood was like, I love my Christian brothers and sisters to death. I love them. I work with many of them. Specifically my Catholic friends who I've had some conversations with. And they believe that if you don't, not all of them, not all, I've met Catholics who don't believe this, but I've met some Catholics who believe that if you don't adhere to the specific Catholic Church, and you're not a member of the Catholic Church, you will burn in hell for all of eternity. Right? What is eternity? Eternity's never ending. It shall never end for as long as ever. Like you will be there forever. Like I can't really vocalize it much.
I've been curious about that because eternity only makes sense within time and space.
Exactly.
Is it outside of it? Because
God is
like,
above time and space.
yeah, because surely if God exists for all time and beyond, then he would exist beyond eternity. So does that mean that eternity is for all of time, or just for such a vast time to a human that it would be maddening?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. It's a question that, and in Judaism, we don't really have to answer that question because, like I said, it doesn't speak about it much. The reason Judaism doesn't speak much about the afterlife, by the way, is that you look at the Torah. The Torah speaks in almost its entirety about how we're supposed to act here on earth. We're not about taking humans to God. It's about bringing God down to the earth, making the world a godly place. That's why I have the 10 Commandments. That's why I have the Noahide laws. That's why I have the rest of the commandments. I'm not doing what I do every day. I don't help a homeless person because I think, this will give me an extra point for maybe when I'm going to go to heaven. That's not why we do that. We do it because I said, wow, when I give this homeless person money, I'm making the world a more godly place because I know that's what God would want me to do. So that's one of the other reasons we don't really talk about it very much. Also with you look in the Old Testament, when it comes to hell, punishments, right? Like punishing people. That's why when it comes to hell specifically, you see in the Old Testament, physical punishments. Like God says, if you don't obey my commandments, you will not get rain in the proper season. When you do my commandments, the fields will not produce their proper produce. If you do this, you'll get a certain skin infection, stuff like that. Whereas the other faiths around the world, they rely on hell. You can't really prove hell until you experience it. You know what I mean? So that's another difference. Judaism is very worldly based. There's references to the afterlife, but that's not the primary focus of the faith. But moving back to what I was saying about the few Catholic friends that I met who talked about the eternity, and that that is forever, and with a Bible that calls God merciful, I cannot comprehend a Bible that calls God merciful many times. And then, somebody like my rabbi who wakes up in the morning, prays, washes his hands, prays, prays. He prays more than he breathes. And he thanks God, and he loves God, and he gives charity, and he leads prayer services, and he believes in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the reason he doesn't accept the Catholic Church is because he believes that he would be following a different God. That's what he believes. God came to his ancestors on Mount Sinai. Deuteronomy 4:2 said, don't ever add or take away anything from what I've given you this day. And he puts his foot down. He says, God told me to do this, so I'm going to pray to him every day and stick true to that. This man's going to die after leading such a virtuous life. And you're telling me the God of the Bible is going to say, oh yeah, I did say that, but you missed the second part. Even knowing you remained faithful to me in the way that you believed that I told your ancestors to do. I'm saying hypothetically, if Judaism was incorrect, because you didn't get baptized in the Catholic Church, even knowing you loved me your entire life and prayed to me more than you breathed, you're going to burn in fire for all of eternity. That's something that I can't grasp. Dante's Inferno talks about this a little bit. They have a guy called the Virtuous Pagan, where he was showing Dante around hell, and when it was time for Dante to leave hell, he was sad that the virtuous pagan couldn't come with him. So it's it's a question that I can't fully grasp it. I can't. That's one of the reasons I'm so. That's one of the reasons I'm further affirmed into my faith, because I don't believe that a merciful God would do that to somebody in his creation.
Well, let me ask as a final question. One thing that I think Christianity sort of lacks is that, and you touched on this when you're talking about Judaism, is that it sort of Judaism seems to outline how you should live. Christianity does the same, but it also kind of has the whole, you're doing this for the afterlife, or you're doing this to get to the point where Jesus returns and there's a war of some kind. What does Judaism say about what we're supposed to do outside of just how to live? Does it give a clear goal of what our point is?
I mean, the purpose of man is simply to exist. God created us to exist. I mean, it was our beautiful creation. It was his beautiful creation. We're to exist. He gives us directions on how to exist, which is given in the Torah, the Tanakh. But the overall purpose, I can speak specifically to the Jewish people, is to, right now we're in an exile. Yes, we have the land of Israel back, but we don't have our Messiah who's going to fully rebuild it and bring all the Jews back home. Jewish people, we need to do this thing called tshuva, which means repentance. So all of those secular Jews, that don't follow the faith, don't do anything, they need to, gradually come back. That's why the movement I'm from, it's called Chabad Lubavitch. Their entire purpose is to it doesn't matter what level of religiosity you are in Judaism, we're going to take you, we're going to accept you, you're part of the community, and gradually try to encourage them to become more and more religious, because we believe that is what will bring the eventual Messiah. And when the Messiah comes, once we've repented and the Messiah comes, there will be peace on earth. There won't be any more sinning. There won't be any. It will be like heaven on earth when the Messiah comes, and that's what we're working towards. That's what the Jewish people. But for non-Jewish people, you got to live a virtuous life. You got to do the same thing the Jews do. Try to bring God to this world. Don't steal. Don't kill. Be good. Help the needy. Do everything you can. You have the same mission we do. We just have a couple of other priestly duties to do in the future. But that's really it. You can trust that if you're a good person, God will judge you fairly in the next life, and that'll be something to worth looking forward to. But God gave you a beautiful life here on earth. Make the most out of it. Don't do every action that you do hoping for a life in the future, in a future world. Do it for where you're living now. God wants you to make the world a good place now. Trust me, heaven is perfect. Heaven smiles when you act good on earth, but heaven doesn't need you to do that. Heaven needs you right here, right now, to make the world a godly place.
Jacob, I think that's a perfect place to leave things off. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
No problem. Thank you for having me, man.